So every year I get a whole heap of questions about the working with children check from nursing students mainly. And so I just want to run through a few things in the form and hopefully answer a few of the questions so that you can come back to it and see how to do things. Or there's a few little things that people constantly ask me that I just wanted to address. If you just Google working with children's check, it should take you straight to the application page. And you can check and see whether you need a check. If you've already got one, you might just need to update it. If not, you might already be able to access the one that is current. So if you need to apply for a new one, you click on Apply in Victoria. And there's a little video here to kind of take you through it. And up the top here, I'm just going to zoom in so you can see. So it says to apply for a check, you must fill in the application form and verify your identity online, and then check for an email from Working with Children for instructions on how to finalise your application at Australia Post, and then attend a participating AusPost outlet and have your photo taken and pay the application fee if you're applying for an employee check. So you can locate an outlet there before you start if you want to, which is usually a pretty good thing to do, or you can just search on Google for your nearest Australia Post outlet that does working with children's checks. Not all AusPost outlets will do them, but you should be able to find one pretty close to where you live or close to Box Hill. So if you click Start Application, there's a whole bunch of stuff here that you will have seen before or that, seems pretty straightforward. It's just important information saying, basically if you're applying for this, you should be aware that it's an offence to do these things. And that if you do these things while holding a working with children checks, your rights will be stripped away and you won't be able to work with children anymore. Not only that, you may be charged with a crime. So it's making people aware of the main parts of the Working with Children Act 2005. So then it just answers some frequently asked questions. Can I work while my application is processed? And it says that you can't. You cannot actually apply for this and then when you're waiting for it to be processed, go and do work, which is why for the nursing students, they ask you to actually do this straight away at the start of the year so that by the time it gets to around to week 10, hopefully everyone has gone through the process and done the Working with Children check and the police check as well. There's a little bit of information about keeping your details up to date. So if your address changes or you change your name or anything like that, or you change to a different organisation, so if you finished phase 1 nursing here but then went phase 2 nursing at another institute, you actually have to contact the department and have them reissue a Working with Children's update. So you just got to be careful about that. If you do move home, you do need to let them know so that they don't keep issuing the Working with Children's check updates to your old address. Privacy disclaimer that comes with every sort of government application. And the information says the information provided for applicants here is intended as general info only. It's not given as legal advice and should not be relied upon. So it's just saying that the stuff here we tell you about the Services Act is general advice. It is not legal advice, which they have to do. And then you go through the questions. So no, you haven't applied for one before, or yes, you have. If you have, it'll ask you to enter your previous number and it'll take you to the page to renew it rather than go through a whole new application. Now here, students always get confused. Do I go employee, volunteer? It's safer to go employee, and that is because employee covers both employee and volunteer, whereas volunteer only covers volunteers. So if you start working with children and you're getting paid for it, then that Working with Children check doesn't actually cover you. So here you just have to enter all your details. So I'm just going to enter fake details for the moment so we can see it. And we can go through, so the form will allow me to keep going. If you've changed your name, then you need to tell them that you've changed your name. If not, leave it as no, move on. Choose your gender, your date of birth, and then you put in where you were born. So I'm putting in fake details. This is not actually where I was born. And if you were born outside of Australia, then you need to actually drop down this box here and choose the country you've come from, and then this will update to province or state or other corresponding material for you to be able to pick. So if you're an international student, make sure you change the country of birth. Or if you were born outside of Australia and it's on your birth certificate, make sure that that is actually changed there, because they compare it to the Department of Birth, Deaths and Marriages, where you get your birth certificate, marriage certificate, death certificates. So if it doesn't match up with those details, your application can be put on hold. So if you don't know where you were born, make sure you check your birth certificate. If you're an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, make sure that you fill out this information correctly. If not, make sure you click no. Then click next. It'll then ask you for an email address and phone number so that they can contact you if there's something wrong with your application. You just need to provide one number there. Most people just provide their mobile so they can be contacted easily. Put in your residential address. If you start to type an address, it should actually start to auto-find using search underneath so that you can actually just find your address straight away. If you have a different postal address, then click no and enter in your postal address. If the postal address is the same as where you live, click yes. And then this will ask you if you've had any other Australian addresses in the past 5 years. The key term here is Australian addresses. So international students always click yes to this and then start filling out details about that they, obviously grew up in Sri Lanka, India, China, Vietnam, Thailand. But the key term here is, have you lived at any other Australian addresses? And if you're an international student and you've only lived at one address in the whole time you've been in Australia, you would click no. If you have lived at multiple addresses or moved, you click yes and you put that in. People always say, why is this that we have to put this in? And that is because the government tracks statistics as to where people move and work with children. So are there more people moving from New South Wales to Victoria to work with children? Are there people moving about in Victoria? It's about tracking the population and how they apply for this and how it changes over time. So if you are an international student, you've just arrived in Australia and you've only lived at one address while you've been in Australia, you click no to this question. If you have moved house, you would say yes, and you would put in the previous address as well. Or if there's multiple previous addresses, you add them in and put them all in. For domestic students, obviously you put in, if you lived with your parents, if you're only 20, then in the past 5 years, you're going to have your parents' address if you lived with your parents. Or if you moved out and you've lived in multiple places, then you need to put that in. The next part is the part where I get a lot of questions. It says, do you know the specific organisation you were doing paid work for? You can put no here if you want, and then just put in the occupation, because you might think, well, I don't know which hospital I'm going to be working for on my placement, so you can just put no. Or you can put yes and put in the organisation's name. And if you start typing in Box Hill Institute, it will actually come up as the institute. Now, if any of these details are wrong, this is really important here to note that if there are any details that are incorrect here or seem a bit strange to the person reading through your application, they won't just reject your application. They will actually call you and ask a few questions to just confirm details. Or if you stuff something up on the form, if you submit it and then you get an email showing all the information and you've stuffed it up, call them straight away and say, look, they'll give you an application number. Give them the application number and say, I screwed this up. Are you able to fix it up? And most of the time, they're pretty reasonable. You just have to provide evidence of any change. This is the other one I keep getting questions about. And for nursing students, you scroll down and you are in paediatric wards of public, private, or denominational hospitals as defined by the Health Services Act. So that's your occupational field. But if you're in other things here, if you're doing a Department of Community Services or a Department of or a diploma of early childhood education, then it might change here, and you might actually have daycare or occasional care or centre-based long day care or child minding services. So if you're doing a different course, obviously things will apply differently here. You pick the one that relates best to what you're actually going to be doing. So for childcare, for early childhood education, it's probably the long-based daycare or family daycare, because they're considered, childcare is considered someone under the age of 15. And there's this one here which kind of starts to confuse people, but if you get them wrong, and then you can correct it at the post office later. So if you know the type of occupation for nurses, the best thing to do is just put both, because then if you get employed where you need to work with children, then like I said, you get counted as an employee. And then if you do some volunteer work with children, the employee one generally covers volunteer as well. It's best just to put both. They've obviously added that in because there's been some confusion about that. So it's best to just put both, because then both will be on your card. If you need to put more fields for occupations, you can. You don't have to. Then click Next. And it'll just ask you to review all the material here, so you can go through it and make sure it's all correct. The next part is identity verification. Now look at the things here that you need. Australia's driver's license, Australian passport, including a passport that has expired no more than 2 years ago, your current Australia visa or document for travel within Australia, which is your passport if you're an international student, or your visa, your Medicare card, your birth certificate, citizenship certificate, or your marriage certificate. So for international students, it's probably your IMI card or your passport that you'll use, right? And you need to have 2 of the following documents. So you could have your visa and your passport, or your visa and your IMI card issued by the Australian government. So then you go to verify your identity online, that you consent to Australia Post verifying your identity online. Now you can just bypass all this if you want to. If you don't want to actually do this online for whatever reason, you can actually just skip this whole thing. You can go cancel and say that you want to verify your identity at Australia Post. So then what it will tell you is that, you are consenting and declaring that all the information here, this is the policies, the regulations and things that it relates to, all the things that you're consenting to, and all the things that are involved in working with children, and a declaration that all the information that you've provided in the form is true and correct, and that the photo that you need to use for the application is no more than 12 months old. So make sure you read through that. It's very important. Don't just tick the box and go on. It's not like a lot of other forms where you just tick the box and say, yeah, that's fine. There actually is a lot of information here that's really important to understand. I'm not going to go through it because there is a lot of information there. Just read it and make sure you understand it before you tick the box, and then go sign and submit. I'm not going to click sign and submit here because obviously I've entered fake details. But once you click sign and submit, it will send you an email with all the information that was on the previous page, which was basically verifying all the information that you've put on. You then print that off and take that with you to Australia Post to finish off the application process. If you have verified your details online using your driver's license or your passport or whatever you've used to verify your identity online, you'll actually just receive an email saying that your application has been received, and you'll be asked to pay the fee, which I'm not sure what the fee is at the moment, but I'll see if I can find it on the website here. You'll just be asked to pay the fee, and then you'll be sent your card in the mail once they've actually gone through the process of checking for your fees. So you can see here that the volunteer card is free. But like I said, if you're doing volunteer work, if you then start getting paid for working with children, if you finish your first phase and then get a PCA job as a nurse, or if you get a job in a daycare centre as a early childhood educator, you then have to upgrade your card to employee anyway. So it's actually better to just do it in the first instance, get it out of the way, and have it so that after the first semester of your course, if you do get a job in the field, you're actually just able to keep working in there. You don't have to go and update your working with children's check. There's also some information there about fines if you do go against the Working with Children Act. So be aware that there are penalty units involved, and it is possible to end up in prison if you go against it bad enough. But I don't think any of the students will have any of those sorts of issues. And that's about it. So really, it gets assessed, and then it gets assessed, and then they will send you a notification to say that it's been processed, and then you'll get a card in the email. The whole process can take up to 10 business days, but it usually is a lot quicker than that, because the only thing that holds it up is if you need to go to the post office to be able to verify your identity. So I hope that's answered some of the questions, common questions that I get from students about the Working with Children's check. I'll do another video for the police check, but it's very, very similar in that you need to provide identity verification, and then you can go to the nearest police station or the nearest post office to actually finish off that application. So I'll do a separate video for that, but that hopefully has answered all the questions about the Working with Children's check.